Hey, Bright Lights, welcome back to the Space Doctor series on the Architecting channel. My name is Angela, and I make thoughtful weekly videos that demystify the science behind design for well-being. This is something we all need to be paying attention to, even if you are not in the industry or may not be an architect, interior designer, contractor, engineer. It still matters. And there is something everyone can do once you understand the way our environment really affects us, right? I mean, we all know that space feels like something, that there are certain places we gravitate to and others we don't really like being in. But when you understand why, now you are in the driver's seat. And that is the whole reason that I'm doing this series, because I'm an architect, researcher, and feng shui practitioner who has spent my whole career studying this stuff. So I really understand very specifically why a space makes you feel a certain way. And if space is going to feel like something, it ought to feel like something good. So, to the extent that we can make the changes we need to make so that our spaces work for us and they enhance our well-being, let's do it. So every week I come to you and I draw two cards from my Saluda Genesis deck. And it has two sections: foundational concepts. So these are really the things that have to do with the physiological response, the social or economic conditions or external environments that can either help or hurt our well-being. And then I pair that with what my research has emerged as 5 different aspects of salutogenesis. I've associated each of those aspects with a feng shui element as well. So every single week, I will draw a card from each of those parts of the deck. This is just a fun way to do this and to make it easy to understand, give you digestible things so you can put them into action and not feel overwhelmed. So that is why you definitely want to like and subscribe, because I'm not going to tell you everything there is to know about a card. I'm just going to hit some highlights related to how the two cards relate to one another. So let's get started. The card that I drew from the foundational concepts is the oxytocin and HPA axis. Now, this is a very scientific card, but don't worry, I will break it down for you. The important thing to notice about this card is it's depicting a crosswalk in a city. And we've all seen the walk, don't walk, or walkie man light that my daughter used to call it. And what we know about those lights is that they are never both on at the same time. There's either stop or go. You can't do both. And that is how this works. So let's start with talking about the HPA axis. That is an acronym for hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And this is the neuroendocrine pathway in our bodies that regulate our response to stress. And they kind of fire sequentially. So when we perceive something or feel an emotion that triggers a stress response, the first thing that happens is our hypothalamus, which is in our brain, stimulates a corticotropic or cortisol friendly hormone that then tells the pituitary gland that it needs to release another stress hormone that is called adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. And then that tells our adrenal glands, which sit on top of our kidneys, to release cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone. Now, if you want to know more about specifically what happens next, what stress does in our body, make sure that you check out some of the other videos in this series, because I do talk specifically about stress. What we're focusing on today is the fact that we have this walk, don't walk effect going on. So oxytocin, just in case you didn't know, is the love hormone. It is what makes parents bond with their newborn baby. It is what we get released into our body when we feel joy, when we feel gratitude, when we're happy. And it helps us out in several ways. So, first of all, it inhibits that corticotropin hormone in our pituitary gland. So, that's step one of the stress process, right? It starts in our hypothalamus, but this is inhibiting that. So, the hypothalamus is sending a weaker stress signal out. Next, it also inhibits that ACTH being produced in the pituitary gland. So, the second step in that stress process is also being buffered. And it also does the same thing in the adrenal glands, so that the signal getting to the adrenal glands is much weaker, and the amount of cortisol that the adrenal gland releases is lower. So, how cool is that, right? These are what are called mutually regulating processes, which means if your oxytocin level is elevated, automatically your cortisol level is lowered, and your body has a much better chance to reset from the effects of stress. This is just blunting it all. So, that basically means that we want to do what we can to keep our oxytocin levels as high as possible. And considering that we release oxytocin when we feel grateful, happy, joyful, or love, why wouldn't we want to feel that way more often, right? So you can help to raise your oxytocin level by doing things like meditating, having a gratitude practice, having a loving and supportive group of family and friends that you interact with regularly. That's important. Just to say, hey, I know my mom loves me, but I only call her once a week. Well, you're not getting as much benefit from that relationship as if you spoke to her more often. It also means thinking about regularly doing things that make you happy, your little joy infusions. So, does that mean that you wear your favorite color more often, or a photo from a fun trip or vacation or event that you keep somewhere where you can see it more often? Does it mean that maybe you take 10 minutes a day to do something you enjoy doing? Think about those little things you can do. The card that I drew from the aspects part of the deck is analogous mapping. Now, this is from the sense of coherence part of the deck. Sense of coherence is a theory that basically says we look to find how manageable, how meaningful, and comprehensible our space is. So if we understand what's going on, that's why we use I understand to represent sense of coherence, we feel better. This is associated with the metal element in feng shui. And the metal element is all about logic and clarity and things following one another in a predictable sequence. So you can see the connection right there. Now, I want you to notice that the image on this card is a very generic looking house, right? Because home often symbolizes peace and comfort to people. And in the areas surrounding the house, we're seeing some things that we associate positively with home, like our cozy bed that we can snuggle up in. Napping is one of my hobbies. I don't know about you, but I love my bed. That table that we can gather around with friends and family, and there's a birthday cake on the table. That first cup of coffee that we have in the morning that we can really enjoy and savor. the barbecue where we're having a fun event, social activity. These are the kinds of things, the kinds of memories that we associate with that very general idea of home. That lived experience makes us want to copy it anywhere we live. So we're looking to replicate a lot of those same practices, the same furniture, the same rituals associated with living anywhere we go because they bring us positive associations. Also means if you are visiting a friend or maybe you rented an Airbnb, you could be in a house you've never been in before, but it still makes sense to you because you are making those comparisons with spaces that you already know and are familiar with. So, analogous mapping works by a process of comparison. So, there is always a source domain. So, in this case, it might be the home, but it could be anything. It could be school, it could be the spa, it could be a dance club, right? Anything that you are familiar with is your source domain. So then when you go somewhere you are less familiar with, or maybe you've never been at all, that becomes what is called your target domain. And you immediately start, you don't even have to try, your brain does this for you. They look for corresponding elements and relationships. So if we have a positive association with a certain domain, like say our home, and we go somewhere else, even if it isn't another home, maybe it's the library, but this library has a lot of the same relationships and elements in it that you would typically find in a home. So our brain is like, oh, yeah, this is cozy. This is comfortable. This is a place to kind of snuggle up and really, tuck in and do some reading. It's making those kinds of associations because what to expect, where to find things, how to behave, that all comes from the similarity that we can find in the elements in that target domain. And this could also, as you imagine, work in the reverse. So it's why, for example, there's a lot of like haunted house things that you can go visit during Halloween. And how do these work? Well, they work by creating those associations that we have with things that are scary. And they put them all together. They get as many of those relationships in there as possible. And then when you go in, everything you ever remember about, oh, broken and dilapidated, dark and shady, creaking noise, right? Anything you can remember, you're now immediately projecting onto this environment and you're expecting that it's going to be dangerous in some way. And therefore, you are more scared. It heightens that fear response. And the other thing that's really interesting is our ability to do analogous mapping is reduced, studies have shown, the higher our anxiety is. So, what could create that anxiety? Well, it could be that we've already brought in a negative association and we don't feel safe, like I just said with the haunted house, but it could be time constraints. I'm running late and I don't really have time to soak this environment in. In either case, you go from being able to understand relationships between things to only being able to recognize those common features. That's how they get you on the haunted house, because you know your life is not in danger. But they get you in such a state of anxiety that you only see the outward appearance. You don't stop to think about the fact that this is a stage prop. So that's how they do it. And since our biggest fear is of the unknown, that means the less we recognize, also, the further our stress escalates. So, how do we then start to fix this? How do we apply feng shui practices as well as design strategies? Well, it means that we want to use a principle in feng shui called environmental anchors. And an environmental anchor is simply an object or a setting that we have a positive association with. So, for example, maybe you have a statue that you bought while you were on vacation somewhere. And every time you see it, you think about your trip, how much fun you have. You think about the fact that maybe the statue was a little pricey, but you decided that you were worth the investment. So when you look at it, you think also about how you are taking care of yourself and celebrating your accomplishments and believing in yourself. So you can see how this statue now becomes an environmental anchor. And even if you might not consciously think all those things, your subconscious is still doing that. It could also be the way that a space is set up, a color scheme, anything at all that is bringing you back to a certain association that is positive. That is an environmental anchor. So think consciously now about what kind of settings you can create. What objects do you want to place in those settings? What symbolism is imbued in them? And also keep in mind that symbolism is relative. So some things are universal, and no matter where you go in the world, people are going to have similar positive associations. Others are cultural. So if you are designing space that other people are going to be used, take a little bit of time to learn about what in their culture creates positive associations. If you're designing for people that have a certain thing in common, like in healthcare, maybe it's behavioral health, take some time to interview potential users of the space to start to understand what things in an environment feel safe or happy or positive to them versus what kinds of things might be negative. So, just to wrap this up, again, we are looking at how we can consciously introduce more things that create happiness, gratitude, and joy in our life because it's going to raise our oxytocin, which is going to force down our cortisol. So, more happy, less stress. And how we're going to do it is by harnessing the power of analogous mapping to reference things that make us feel good in other spaces that we are walking into. And this really does work, guys. So last week we talked about occupying the edge and socioeconomics in the exposome. And I talked all about how important that is. And that set the theme for the week. Well, as you may know, May is Behavioral Health Awareness Month. And I thought, oh, I've done a lot of behavioral health projects as a topic very near and dear to my heart. I want to share something I know on LinkedIn, but what should I share? And I know I'm going to talk about how in many of my projects, I really work hard to create that occupiable edge in those behavioral health milieu spaces, and how our post occupancy evaluations show just how much of a difference that makes. And the post went viral. Everybody loved this post. I had people asking me to share some of that research. So, again, it's so much fun to do this with all of you. And I hope that you have stories like that too, where what you learned kind of, sets your brain up to think about how you could use that knowledge in the coming week. So make sure you like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.